So we're going to resume lesson 8. So we've just launched our project. I think we'll actually deal with the header first because that part's fairly simple. So let's open up our layout file. Our layout.hbs. If you don't have yours open, you can find it under Views. We didn't create this file. The Express generator gave it to us, but we want to make a few changes to it. So we've got over on the right our register and login links. So we're going to add a little logic here to this because once somebody signs in, we want to hide these links. So I'll just tab them over and we're going to use an if statement in handlebars syntax. So I'll open a set of handlebars tags and we'll say if user. So if we have a user variable, and then we'll also add a handlebars else. So I've now got this if else, and I'm going to move our register and login links inside of the else condition. So if we have no authenticated user, show register and login. I'll throw this code in the chat. So our links we already had last week. I've just added this handlebars if else statement, and we've moved the register and login links into the else for when we have no authenticated user. So I'll maybe just put in here, user is anonymous. And here, user is authenticated. So what I'm going to do when our user is authenticated, is we'll add 2 items to the nav bar. We'll use the same classes. And if we have a user, we want to print their username. Pretty common, right? Blackboard does it. A lot of sites do this. Once you log in, Outlook does it, or Outlook 365, you log into Outlook in your browser, it prints your username up at the top. Gmail does it. What's the other link we should have at the top right when somebody's logged in? We typically see 2 things at the top right of our screen when we're logged into a website. We see our name or our username, and what else typically goes at the top right? That's true, Justin. Thank you, Janelle. That's right. So we'll add a class of navlink, and we'll have to build a route for logout. So here's our nav bar now. I'll put this up on Pastebin. It's maybe a little easier to read than in the chat. So I'm going to save that. I'll make it available to you for you, everybody on Pastebin in case there's any piece of it you need. Go away. Oh, look at that. It listens to voice commands. Cool. So here's now the right side of our nav bar. If we have a user, show the username and log out. Otherwise, show register and log in. And yep, thanks, Rachel. Yep, you mentioned it as well. So let's see what happens. So I'll go to login. I've suggested everybody use this credential last week to sign up. So you don't have to remember user@gc.ca and test123 $. So I've put that in the chat. If you don't have that account, you can just go and register an account. Now that's interesting. So how come, notice, why didn't my nav bar change? Something on my screen here. Right, we wrote this logic that says if the user is authenticated, show the username and log out. Right, you got it, Maggie. We haven't actually provided the user from the controller to the view. So the view isn't aware that we have an active user authenticated. So for this, we're going to need to go to our index controller and we need to pass, when there is a current user, we need to pass it in. So let's go to our index.js. So on all of our pages, where do we want to do it? Well, where do we go? Once we log in, right, we go to the projects pages. So we can go to details or add course. So in our projects and courses controllers, we need to pass in the user to the view. So that way the logic here, if we have a user, we can print the username. So let's open up I've got a lot of stuff open here. I'll close a bunch of it up. So I'm going to go first to the controllers and projects. So the first thing we want to do is add passport. And then we're going to have to modify any of the methods that return views. So here, when we're rendering the index view, now pass the current user, if any. So when we render the index method, render the index view, we're passing the title, we're passing the list of projects that show up here. We're also now going to pass a variable called user. Where does it come from? It actually comes from Passport. Passport stores it in the request object. So if we pass our request.user, now when we're logged in, our little if statement that we've added to our nav bar should show up. So our res.render statement now looks like this. We were already passing in title and projects. We're now also passing the user object. So I'm going to try again. Log in. And now on our projects index, right, it shows my email address and log out. So we've modified the method that calls our index. If I go to add or edit though, we have to do the same thing here. So when I click add, notice we now need to pass the user here as well when I go to add a course. So all of the other methods they all need this as well. So when we're adding a project, same thing. When we render the view, projects add, we want to pass the request.user object. We need it in one more place in this controller. So this was in the router.get add. So this loads our empty project add view. We'll also want to add this in the get for the edit method. We don't need it for the posts because those are not loading a particular view. We don't need it for delete because we're just deleting from the MongoDB and redirecting. But down here under get edit, again, where we're rendering projects edit, we're going to pass the request.user here as well. So now when I'm viewing the list of projects, adding or editing, my nav bar should be right. Now I save my changes, it logs me out. We don't need it in the delete action hung because delete doesn't actually render any views. If we look at delete, it simply removes from the database and then redirects back to projects, to the index. So we really don't need to pass the user object in this case. Just in 3 places. In our get at the root, so wherever we're calling res.render, which is 3 places in this controller, our get projects add, and get projects edit. Because the logout doesn't do anything yet, Justin. We haven't built a logout handler. We'll do that in a second. It'll be pretty easy, like just 1 or 2 lines of code. So now when I log in, it shows me user and log out. When I add, so each time, if you notice the nav bar, it's correct. Now we'll want to do the same thing on our add a course page. So in our courses controller, I'm sorry, Justin, I'm not sure I understand. When you say all the code gets put onto one line, where does it get put onto one line? I'm not sure I know where you're looking. So let's open up our courses controller. Justin, I'll give you a chance to answer. So in our courses controller, we want to do the same thing. We'll open up courses. I don't know. That's not necessarily my understanding that it's just one line. So I unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on that. So in our get courses add, again, we're passing in the title. So here I'm also going to pass in request.user. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you, Justin, but simple truth is I don't know. And I'm not, that doesn't necessarily correspond with exactly my understanding. So when we're adding a course, when we load that form, we want to pass the user object here as well, so that our navigation bar shows appropriately. So now when I add a course, I'll have to log back in. Now when I go to add a course, right, it still shows that I'm logged in. So we have to deal with log out as well, because when we click it, it's calling /logout, but we have no get handler for this. So we'll need to write a simple method that will sign the user out and redirect them back to the login page. So we'll go to our index controller that has the methods for register and login. And we'll write a simple handler for logout. So the router.get at /logout. And I'm having a bit of a brain cramp about what I need to go in here. Let me just check my notes for a minute. Sorry. So in here, we'll do our request response next, callback, we call request.logout, and then we'll just redirect. Sorry, log the user out, and then response.redirect back to the login page. So that should toggle our header and take them back to the login screen. I'll just try this out. I'll put it up on Pastebin, but fairly simple. When you have a get request at /logout, destroy the user in the request object and redirect back to the login screen. I'll try it out. Try to move it around so you can still see the code if you need to. So I'll go to login again. And we can browse around. And now I click log out. And I'm back to the login screen. And my username and logout disappear. Right, so even if we go back here, we're signed out. Okay, Janelle, if your username is not shown, then make sure, so two things you need to do. In your controller, so starting in your projects controller, you need to make sure you add passport on line 10, and you also pass the user object in all of your res.render statements. Whenever we're loading a view, we have to provide the user to the view because our header is looking for this user variable. If it doesn't find it, it's not going to show up. Does it say log out, or it just says register and log in all the time? Ah, right. If you're not using NodeMon, any of the changes you make are not going to show up right away. That's a good point, Nick.
No, not log out or username is shown over here. I don't know why. And I
And,
have written passport, cons passport require passport, and even they did like user require. Yeah.
okay, check your syntax here as well. I may have to look at it after, you know. It sounds like you're on the right track. You may just be missing something small.
Yeah, I'll check your GitHub account later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I will actually, that's a good point. I will just push to GitHub now. So if you are missing something, again, you'll have to replace the, but you can check my code. I'll push to Git right now. So let's see, one. Okay, I've updated GitHub, so if you need to compare any of your code with any of mine, you can do that now. The repository is up to date. So we can log in and out, but even anonymous, right? We still have full access to do everything. At least we have full access when I restart my server. So even when I'm logged out, right, I can still change things. I can delete things. I can add. So even as an anonymous user, I still have all this functionality. So we want to control access here. These shouldn't be links. These should be hidden when we're logged out, as well as the actual URLs. If I go to this URL directly without logging in, I should get sent back to the login screen. I shouldn't be able to add, edit, or delete to call any of these methods. So we're going to need to do something in the controller to manage this. So let's start, maybe, we'll start in the view. So we want to add some logic on our index view. So this column, we'll just start simply with the add a new project link. So we'll open up our views projects. Let's open up index.hbs. So on line 2, we've got this link to add a new project. So we're going to wrap this in an if statement. Pretty simple if statement, if user. So if there is a user object, show this link. Otherwise, don't show it. Right? So when I'm not logged in, it disappears. When I am logged in, now I see it. And we're going to want to use this same logic around here and here. So I'll log out. And then we need to control access to the URLs directly, right? Because I'm logged out, I can still go to project/add and the form will load for me. So at the controller level, we'll need to do some checking to say, if you're not authenticated, you can't load this view. So we're going to use this if statement a few more times. So first we've got this actions column. We're going to hide the heading as well as the delete links for anonymous users. So again, I'll just indent this. And I'm going to move wrap my actions heading as well as this entire column that contains the delete buttons. So both of these are going to go inside one of these handlebars if conditions. So as an anonymous user, I don't even see this column. I won't see the delete button in each row. And I won't see the actions, this fifth column heading, until I log into the site. Whoops, I missed. Sorry, if user. Sorry about that. I missed that in my last if statement. So if we have a user, so right now there's no user. So notice that actions column and the delete buttons, they're gone. As soon as I log in, interesting. What happened? Oh, we're inside of the projects. So it thinks user is part of the projects variable. So I think I need this. I'll just double check that. I know it's complaining. 2 dots. There. So user does not belong to projects. It's part of the variable we pass to the view. So once we get inside this loop, I have to reference the user variable this way. So I'm logged in, but when I log out, I get a read-only version. We also need this logic around these links. So there's a few ways we could do this. We can either rewrite them as static text if we want. We could change the href as well so that these are still links, but they don't go anywhere. Probably an anonymous user shouldn't even see these as links. It should just be static HTML, where you can't interact with them at all until you sign in. So here, I'm going to use an if-else. So if we have a user, we'll show these as links. If we don't, we'll just print the project name as HTML static text. So when we're logged in, it's clickable. When we're anonymous, it's not. Shrink this down a bit so we can see. So as an anonymous user, I just get plain text, just a read-only view. But once I log in, oh, same problem here. I'm inside my project, so I need this. Once we're inside the loop, just like I needed for the delete, we need to reference go outside of the project's variable. Okay, so when I'm logged in, these are links. When I'm anonymous, just a static table. So our logic in the view is done, and this is part of what you'll need to do for your assignment. So in your assignment, as an anonymous user, they can see the data, but they have no access to change it. Now, you could also do two different versions of the view. You could do a public version that's just HTML, where you don't have this logic inside. And then you could do a private version for someone who's logged in, where they have access to add, edit, delete. Up to you whether you want to do this in two separate views or contain the logic where you sort of have two versions of it in the same view, a read-only as well as an ability to add, edit, delete. So you can implement it in assignment 2 however you want to. So there's our logic at the view level. So here's our full file with all our authentication checks. Does anybody have any questions about our code or logic here in this view now, so that it can serve two purposes? I've put the, okay, sorry, I missed a couple questions in the chat. Would we put one around edit as well? So yes, we did. The difference between if difference between so the handlebar syntax, so this is just the opening tag and that's the closing tag. Maria, maybe I may not have quite understood. Do you want to clarify your question so I can make sure I fully understand what you're asking? Okay. So really no different than like an opening and closing PHP tag. That's right, Maggie, because once we go into projects, anything we reference is now referencing the project's variable. But the user is at the same level as the project's variable, right? So without this ... it can't read the user variable. If I take this out, it thinks user is part of the project's variable. So when I do this, even logged in, it doesn't recognize the user object. It says the user object is null because it thinks user is a child to the project's variable. So using the ... says this user variable, it's not part of projects. It's a separate variable altogether that's being passed from the controller. It's a bit confusing, I know, and obviously I got it wrong. I had to fix it when I first did it. Nick, there are other ways you can do authentication. Passport is kind of the most, yeah, the dot is so we can get outside our existing loop. So Nick, yes, you don't have to use Passport, but it's the most common authentication method with Node. It's not the only one though. So you can implement your own. But Passport does things like salting and hashing, verifying logins, preventing duplicate usernames, does all those things for you. No, because there's no reference to Passport here in the view, right? This is just whether there's a user object. How you create that user object, that happens in the controller and the application configuration on the back end. So even if you used your own authentication scheme, you'd still be passing a user object to your front end. So the handlebars logic would be similar. It's a great question. So now we need to implement access controls at the controller level because anonymous users can still, they don't see the links, but they could still load any of our URLs. So we've only controlled what they see on the index view, but we haven't actually prevented them from loading our form or even calling delete. So for that, we need to add a little bit of logic to the controller, to both the project's controller and courses. So what we're going to do here, maybe I'll do it near the top. We're going to write a little function that we can call from any of the methods that should be secure, which will basically be all the methods in the project controller except this one. This one is public. You don't need to log in to see a list of projects. But for any of the others, for the add, to load the form, or to post the form, for delete, or the edit, get, or post, any one of these, you've got to be authenticated to do. So I'll just create a simple function. I'll call it is logged in. And we'll say if our request, and this is built, so again, Nick, this is built into Passport. So if our request is authenticated, and there's brackets there, which I always seem to miss when I do this lesson. If our request is authenticated, and this is the first time we're going to use the next parameter. We're going to return next. So do the next thing in the request, i.e., continue with the calling function. So go ahead, connect to the database, render a view, do whatever it is that happens next. So when we call return, this function ends. If the request is not authenticated, we want to redirect to the login. In this case, we have an anonymous user try to access a private method. So we're going to take them back to the login screen. So request authenticated means user is already authenticated. So if they're authenticated, we're going to let them continue with whatever method they called. If they're not authenticated, we're going to send them to the login screen. Any questions about this method? I would assume the logic is fairly straightforward. I can put it up on Pastebin if you like. So now we want to call this method in all the methods of our projects controller except the first one. So we're going to leave this as public. So how do we call it? What we do, if we go down to our get projects add, before our callback, we add a call to is logged in with a comma. So this is kind of like the ASP.NET authorized tag above a method. So we've now made this private using is logged in. So by first calling is logged in, as soon as we get a request at this URL, the first thing it does is jump up here and checks if the user's authenticated. If they are, it calls next. So this just keeps going. If the user's not authenticated, we take them away from that page and take them to login. So we can try this out. So I'll maybe go to my homepage. And then I'm going to go to projects/add. Try this URL. It should redirect us to the login screen because we're anonymous. And the post methods, Maggie, all of them except this one. This one we're going to make public because we're going to let anonymous users see the data, right? And we've added logic into the view that hides all the links. I think somebody's got their mic on. Maybe I could just ask you, if you wouldn't mind, to mute your mic, because we're getting a bit of feedback. Janelle, I think your microphone is on. Okay, no problem. So we've now controlled access to project/add through the get method, but we can still edit or delete. So I'm going to add this is logged in to all the other methods and not just the get methods, but to the especially to the post method. So people can't use something like Postman to submit data when they're not authenticated. So each one of these we're going to add this call to is logged in. So only our first method is public. All the others, they're private. Okay, so I've added is logged in after the path in each one. So now as an anonymous user, if I try to edit or delete, everything's locked except for this method. We'll do the same thing with our ability to add a course. In fact, we could even hide this link in the nav bar too, even. That you can't see the add course until you log in. So first go to layout. We'll wrap the add course link in an if statement. So if we have a user, we'll show the add course link. And then we can actually, we'll just maybe replicate our is logged in function in the projects controller. Probably be more efficient to make it global, but for now, just keep it simple. I'll just copy it to the courses controller. And we'll make sure the get and post for adding a course, again, requires a user to be logged in. So now my add course link will disappear until we log in. Now it comes back. Again, we need to control access through the controller too, because if I go to courses/add, I'm not logged in, but I can still get here. So there's no logic in the controller that says, hey, you can't come in when you're anonymous. So we'll quickly fix this up. I'll push all this stuff up to GitHub in a minute. So if you're a bit behind, don't panic. So I'm going to go back to our projects. I'll copy this is logged in function. Actually, I wonder if I can put it in our globals file. I'm going to see if I can copy it there. I'll have to think about doing that. I won't do that on your time. For now, I'll just copy it, I think, into here. We'll make it global maybe next week. I'll do it, or I'll figure it out on my own time. So I'm going to copy it to courses. And then on both the get and the post, I'm going to add this check. So you cannot add a course. These are the only two methods here. You can't add a course unless you log into the site. So just copy that method from projects controller to the courses controller. And in our get and post, again, we'll call the is logged in function before we render a view or save to the database. So now this should be secure. If I try to load it again, it says, nope, got to log in first. And once I log in, all good. Okay, so Hung, you probably just have a syntax error. It will show you in your terminal what's wrong. It'll show you where you need to go. So our local authentication is basically complete. We've done everything we wanted to do with a local authentication. We can sign up, we can log in, we've got logic in our navbar, we've got logic in our view, and we've got access control through the controllers so that Only an authenticated user can make changes to the data. I'm going to push everything up to GitHub. I'd like to take a break here. And actually happy to hear from you. So I want to implement GitHub authentication. And I'll give you guys a choice because you're adults. I like choice. We probably need about an hour to do our GitHub authentication, roughly. We can do it today, or I can set you free and we can start class with GitHub next week. Let me know in the chat when you'd like to do it. So that's one vote for today. I am easy either way. More than happy either way. So let me know in the chat what you think. You can even message me privately if you prefer not to express your preference to the rest of the class. I'm comfortable with that too. Okay, thank you. If anybody else has an opinion, please use the chat. Like I said, either to the whole class or to me privately, whatever you'd like. So I've pushed everything up to GitHub. It's 1:54. Not seeing a lot of opinion, but I do thank those of you who have offered one. Okay, if there is something in particular you'd also like me to go back over, then I'm happy to do that. Obviously, I can't redo the full 2 hours, but if there's a particular file that you want to look at and talk about in more detail, then please let me know. I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to suggest, based on what I'm seeing, that we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 2:05, okay? And we will start our GitHub login implementation. And if there's something that you may have missed, you didn't quite understand from first part of class, please send a message to me in the chat and we can look at that when we come back. Before we start into GitHub, that's fine, but please let me know what specifically we should look at. We'll be back in 10 minutes.